I'm going to continue to work from the Gospel of Luke, reminding you that last week we read from Luke's Gospel, chapter 13, and he talked about the story of Jesus healing the bent-over woman on the Sabbath in the synagogue, and the fury that that created. Today, we are going to continue with a story of more of Jesus' actions, Luke's Jesus' actions on the Sabbath. In chapter 14, Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, beginning with verse 1. On the occasion when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. Just then, in front of him, there was a man who had dropsy. And Jesus asked the lawyers and the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not?" But they were silent. So Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away. Then he said to them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, will you not immediately pull it out on the Sabbath day?" And they could not reply to this. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. "When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, 'Give this person your place.' And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' And then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted." Thus ends the reading of the word. Now, most people focus on the second part of that story, and oftentimes in what's called a pericope, that is the chosen passage that you preach on, these two stories are separated. But I decided not to separate them. I decided the prescription was to read verse 1 of chapter 14 and then skip down to verse 7 and continue to read the story about the banquet. But I decided after we preached about the bent-over woman, after I preached about the bent-over woman last Sunday and Jesus getting in all sorts of hot water for having done what on the Sabbath? Healed on the Sabbath. And the leader of the synagogue last week was so upset, put his hands on his hips and said, "Okay, you people, you can come to the synagogue 6 days out of the week to be healed. You don't have to do it on the Sabbath," because there's a what against doing that? A law. There's a law that says you're not supposed to do any work. It doesn't say you're not supposed to heal. It says you're not supposed to do any work. So I guess if your profession is that of a healer, then if you heal on the Sabbath, you're doing work. Now, in chapter 13, there's also, in just the verses preceding this story, I want to do the scene for you, okay? Paint the picture. Jesus has been warned, wonderfully warned, by some friendly Pharisees who have come to him and who have said, you need to get away from here because Herod wants to kill you. Go ahead, say it. Herod wants to kill you. You need to get away from here because Herod wants to kill you. And Jesus responds to them as, "You go tell that fox that I got work to do." And so now Jesus is invited to Din at the head Pharisee's house. He's invited for a meal on the Sabbath. Now, it may not be in the same town. It may not be in the same village. However, it's on the Sabbath, and it's with the leaders, the religious elite, who have invited him to come to dinner. Do you suppose that they might be wanting to chat to go to the dinner at the house of the head Pharisee. I want you guys to back me up. No. We have this picture of Luke's Jesus going to the dinner at the house of the Pharisees, all by himself. And Luke wants us to hear this. He points this out to us. He says, they were watching him closely. Okay, we've got our eye on you, Jesus, because we don't like what you're doing. We don't approve of how you are conducting your ministry. So he comes to the Pharisee's house, and what is he confronted with? He's immediately confronted at the Pharisee's house with another dinner guest who has the dropsy. Now, we don't use this term very often anymore. And some of you may know what the dropsy is. I'm sure Larry and Lawrence know what the dropsy is. But the dropsy is only a description of a condition. It's not really the name of a disease. And the description is of a disease called, a condition that we call today ascites. And what you see is somebody who has a very large abdomen that is dropped low, and they have edema, they have swelling in their lower extremities because this swelling here has clogged up, okay, where the return of fluid from your lower extremities. So you may see somebody like this. This guy probably had skinny arms, okay, skinny shoulders, and then had this big, huge abdomen and big swollen legs. Now the condition is caused by a lot of things. It's caused by hepatitis, or cirrhosis of the liver, or pancreatitis, or portal hypertension, which, never mind. And this condition was called in those days the dropsy. Now it may look a lot like Pickwickian syndrome, which many of you may recognize, but Pickwickians is a little different because Pickwickians has fat around here, but skinny legs and skinny arms. So the dropsy isn't Pickwickians. The dropsy is ascites. Okay? So here's this guy lumbering around at the dinner. Jesus takes note of him immediately and says, before he does anything, to all of the Pharisees gathered around, I can just picture leaning up against the wall like this going, so, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? As they're all looking at this man, obviously ill with the dropsy. And they go, they're not going to say a word. They're going to say nothing. They're totally silent. Why? Why are they silent? They don't want to commit themselves. They don't want to be the one to speak up. They don't want to be the one to say, well, in this case, maybe you could help our friend Saul. They don't want to embarrass themselves in front of Saul and say, whatever you do, it's the Sabbath, don't heal Saul. They're silent. So Jesus goes ahead and heals this man. Now you have to understand that if he heals this man, the look of this human being changes immediately. The look of this person changes. Jesus makes a decision, Luke's Jesus makes a decision to have the man leave. He says, now go home. Perhaps because he doesn't want this poor man to get caught up in the middle of his own debate. As the Pharisees go, well, you shouldn't have done that. You weren't supposed to do that. They're free to say it if the man's gone, but if he's not gone, they're not free to say it. Am I correct? They're not free to stand there and say, Saul, why didn't you tell him not to heal you? in the midst of knowing there is this great controversy over this, Jesus has made this the fire of his ministry. He has made this law about what you get to do on the Sabbath the absolute fire of his ministry. And in this, the second story, he's called salt on the embarrassment wound, where the Pharisees have been confronted face to face with the idiocy of this law. When someone needs help, Jesus is saying, we need to help them if we can. The next story about people choosing the seats of importance at the dinner has everything to do with the notion that the reason they have these laws is to be in control. The reason that these laws were created was to keep order and to prevent chaos. The reason that these laws existed in the minds of the Pharisees, the reason that these laws exist is so that they can hang on to control and make sure that the people of God are doing God's will. But they've lost focus. The laws don't serve that purpose anymore. This law serves to prevent somebody from being given what will do them good. See what I'm saying? But Jesus says, you guys, well, he doesn't really say that, but I'm interpreting it. You're too puffed up with your own importance. You are too full of the fact that you know better than anybody else what is good for the people. Be very careful how you see yourself. Be very careful how you determine what is right and good for everyone else. Because if it's self-serving, if you're doing it to serve the smoothness of your own way of life, if you're making it so things are easy and less complicated for yourselves, you're doing and making these decisions and these laws for the wrong reason. Now, we have stupid laws, don't we? And we live in a republic that has a fabulous Constitution. Wonderful Constitution. How many times has it been amended? 27 times. It has been amended 27 times. And it was written to be amended. Absolutely. It was written to evolve. Now, so Jesus is making a point about the fact that you can't get stuck without evolving. You have to evolve. You have to evolve your thinking. You have to allow your society to evolve. Do you know how long it took to get the Civil Rights Act passed? Don't think I'm smart. I looked this stuff up. John F. Kennedy submitted that Civil Rights Act on June 11th, 1963. I'm proud to say. It came into being, it was ratified on June 19th, 1964. Do you know who made that happen? John F. Kennedy was assassinated in the middle of that year. Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Texan, made that happen, and stood up before the Congress and the Senate, and he said, the greatest memory, the greatest eulogy that you could give to John F. Kennedy is to make sure this passes. It took a year of fighting and wrestling before the Civil Rights Act was passed. But we evolved. We evolved as a society. We started to, it was only the beginning, we started to evolve. We have some stupid laws that I'm going to share with you in Palm Springs. It is illegal for you to walk a camel down Palm Canyon Drive between the hours of 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Which means it's okay for you to walk that camel down Palm Canyon Drive between 6 p.m. and 4 p.m. the next day. In Cathedral City, there is a law that says one may not bring their dog to school. There's another law in Cathedral City that says it is prohibited to sleep in a parked vehicle. I don't know if they're talking about a nap. I don't know if they're talking overnight. It's just prohibited, so don't do it. Only sleep in it when it's moving. All right, here's the third one. Persons may not ride their bicycles through the fountain of life. In Cathedral City. You can ride them through the fountain of life in any other city, but not in Cathedral City. Jesus is trying to make a point with the Pharisees that they need to take off their rigid hats and they need to put on hats that have compassion for the people, that think about the people, not the rule of law, that think about what is good for the people, not the rule of law, and not for their convenience and not for their control. In our world today, you and I have some issues that we need to wrestle with. There are some changes in the laws in our country that are going to cause us as a church to do some wrestling. We need to understand and we need to study. We need to learn about the meaning of immigration reform in our world. We need to take a look now as the United Methodist Church, how we are going to respond to the law of same-sex marriage being okay. We are going to have to make a decision about whether or not we are going to be a congregation and a church that invites same-sex marriage into this sanctuary. I know this is scary stuff. I know this is nervous stuff. But we have to wrestle with this. Jesus calls us to wrestle with the issues of our day, just as he was calling the Pharisees to wrestle with the issues of their day. You cannot stay in the same place forever. You cannot stay on the same page forever. You must move forward. You must evolve. You must think. We are called, as United Methodists, as Christians, to give some thought as to where we are going to go as a church, as a congregation. And it's risky and it's scary. But together, I think we can get there.